Well, welcome and good morning to everyone, and thank you for attending today. We gather not just to discuss technology, but to address the core risks and opportunities shaping the future of UK defence and critical national infrastructure. Let me begin by thanking METCLOUD for hosting today's event. Their leadership in secure cloud technologies and their commitment to innovation in cybersecurity make them a fitting convener for this crucial conversation. Their work continues to exemplify the kind of forward-thinking and resilience we aim to embed across our national infrastructure. We are here because the landscape is shifting fast. Data sovereignty, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and the broader risk environment are no longer abstract policy topics. They are defining the contours of our national resilience, economic stability, and operational readiness. Data sovereignty in a world where data fuels every aspect of defence and critical services, ensuring that UK data is stored, governed, and processed within sovereign control is no longer optional. Whether it's mission-critical military intelligence, national energy grids, or personal health records, data must be treated as a strategic asset, not a convenience. The threats we face are no longer hypothetical. We are dealing with sophisticated state actors, hybrid campaigns, and a blurring of lines between cybercrime and cyber warfare. Industry and government must now operate on the assumption that compromise is a matter of when, not if. And in reality, resilience becomes as critical as defence. Artificial intelligence, meanwhile, is reshaping how we detect threats, make decisions, and even deploy assets. But the promise of AI must be matched by a robust framework of governance, because an unregulated algorithm can be just as dangerous as an unpatched system. And surrounding all of this is the risk landscape itself, fluid, interconnected, and increasingly systematic. Climate volatility, geopolitical instability, supply chain fragility, and technological disruption are no longer isolated risks. They are force multipliers, and they demand joined-up thinking. This is why we are here today, to bring together the best of industry expertise, policy insight, and technological leadership to chart a path forward that is secure, sovereign, and smart. We must move from reacting to risk to designing for resilience, from passive compliance to proactive sovereignty, from fragmented approaches to whole-of-nation collaboration. So let today be about action, alignment, and ambition. Let us not only understand the threats, but shape the future together. And to move this forward, I'm delighted to welcome the panel we have here today. We have Ian Vickers from METCLOUD, who is hosting today's event. We have my colleague from the House of Lords, Lord McNicol, who is a trade envoy on behalf of the Prime Minister, but also recently appointed chair of the Nuclear Industry Association. We have Sebastian on the end here, who is the Security, Public Policy and Engagement Manager at National Gas, and obviously that's a very important area which we will explore this morning. We have Sir Alec Shelbrooke, who is Vice President of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly and brings international defence and security insights, engaging with data sovereignty and cybersecurity within NATO's strategic objectives. And also we have, I'm delighted to say, Don Randall, who has served with the City of London Police, focusing primarily on fraud and counter-terrorism, but after spending 13 years at JPM Morgan Chase as a managing director, he joined the Bank of England in 2008 and became its first ever Chief Information Security Officer. So I think we have a lot of expertise in the room this morning. And to get things underway, I'm going to ask everyone just in 3 or 4 minutes just to describe how they see things from their own experience. If I can start with you, Ian.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. So we are METCLOUD, and we provide sovereign data cloud services to organisations operating in those kind of sectors that are listed here as headliners. So defence, supply chain companies in defence, critical national infrastructure, and those kind of organisations operating which may not be obvious to most businesses, but people operating in financial services, insurance are classed as critical national infrastructure, so is banking, and so forth. Now, the conversation piece that we're going to have today couldn't probably have happened last year. Whilst we've been operating for over 5 or 6 years now, delivering these kind of services to organizations with that conversation piece around data sovereignty and cybersecurity, we were still having conversations with people this time last year, who didn't even understand what data sovereignty meant. Why was it important? Why was it critical? However, due to geopolitical tensions, obviously the war with Russia and Ukraine, there's tensions over in the Far East with China and other countries that are around those areas. And we're seeing pockets of war everywhere. And this is only increasing. And we've seen only in the last few weeks and months conversations with our own government talking about increasing defence spend that had been over many, many years coming down. And now it's going back up. And they're talking about increasing that to 3%, 3.5%. And there are some rumblings about maybe 5% on GDP. Now, when we talk to everybody here from the panel and so forth, they've got great insight as to what's going on from a geopolitical perspective. But we operate at the epicenter every single day. We see the amount of challenges and how many attacks that we have to fend off for our customers. And it is increasing exponentially year after year. The increases in cyber attacks are significant, sophisticated, and often novel approaches. So in response to that, we've had to develop artificial intelligence capability to help defend our capability for our customers and so forth. So we'll go in a deeper dive on this. But I just thought it would be well worth setting the scene as to why today we're having this conversation, and what you'll see both nationally and globally. These kind of events will be happening more often. There'll be more cadence, more momentum around conversations around digital and data security and cybersecurity at a sovereign level. And every country, whether it's the UK, whether it's France, whether it's Germany, any European country right now is all focused around their own data security and sovereignty. So that's why it's really important today to have this conversation. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to come to Sebastian next. I mean, obviously, in the last few weeks, there's been a lot of news around attacks on Marks and Spencers, which tends to be when people in the UK get more interested in cyber and security, because it means that there are supply shortages in terms of the shelves. But in terms of your sector, the country really would have some significant problems if the right processes weren't put in place. So perhaps you could just walk us through that.
Well, thanks, first of all, for inviting me. My apologies for Jake not being able to come here. But hopefully, given that I work in the security space at National Gas, I'll be able to give a bit more insight into how we approach security overall. The first difference, I think, compared to what you were saying, is that we are classified as a critical national infrastructure. So anything that happens to us is does not only have a commercial impact, but also affects people's lives directly. Millions and millions of lives, millions of businesses. So we have to be at the forefront of ensuring that our security and defense capabilities are there to meet any threat that comes at any time, any day, at any moment. And so we operate mainly, I would say, on 3 areas, and in terms of how we approach security. So the first one is we really need to understand the threat landscape. And as an energy company, and I think in the energy sector, unlike other sectors such as banking and so on, we have been relatively accustomed to understanding geopolitical risks and so on. But I think something that we have been experiencing over the past 10 years in the energy sector is the realization that threats are not only happening in silo, but are part of a broader risk perspective, if I can call it that. So any geopolitical events that happen in the world will have a cyber implication as well, and potentially a physical implication as well. I think obviously the current context that we have, particularly with the war in Ukraine, is a really, really good example in terms of how a geopolitical event can have effects in the UK and with our allies, and how that puts in danger our infrastructure. And so it is really key for us to understand that threat, the nature of it, the actors, their capabilities, their practices, but not only in terms of what they're doing today, but what they might do tomorrow. So at National Gas, we have been building I would say, sector-leading intelligence capabilities to really understand where that threat may come from. And basically within the 6 months to 2 year framework, because that allows us to then prepare ourselves to meet our threats and make sure that we carry out our operations. The second aspect of our security framework is to really understand where there are policy gaps and to prepare our regulatory burdens in order to make sure that for us commercially, but also for the wider UK C&I sector, it is secure. And so we work alongside government and other agencies such as the National Security Centre to make sure that they understand from our perspectives what the threats are, but also where we see in terms of how the policy can meet those threats and allow for not only us, but the wider UK economy to be as resilient as possible. And then the third challenge and an area where we are investing a lot is on people. I think it is absolutely necessary to have the skills, not only on cyber, but also for emerging technologies such as AI, because we will inevitably, all of us, be using those tools, but we have to make sure that we understand the security risks that come with those. But not only us users, but also CEOs, leaders in those businesses, they need to understand what the risks are, what the benefits, of course. But given that we are at the very early stages of implementing those technologies into our systems, we need to make sure that, for instance, security is taken as a paramount aspect when it comes to implementing those systems into our operations. And again, I go back in terms of the regulatory aspect of things. So we need to make sure that the government and the necessary regulators understand the security aspects of things to make sure that over the coming years, we don't have any security incidents that come from implementing those technologies at a pace that was perhaps necessary from an economic point of view, but from a security perspective, it wasn't really the right approach. So I'll leave it at that for now. But
that's great, thank you. We may come back to that point about people a little bit later on, because I suspect that you may have things to say around where some of the weaknesses are and the vulnerabilities in the system. Don, if I can come to you next.
Sure. It's thanks. And I think it's a different perspective. I think you'll see a theme coming through this, because I made my notes earlier a couple of days ago and taken about half of them, which means it should be good. I also think also look at the practicalities. I come from this from a law enforcement background. I actually left UK police, mainline policing, over 30 years ago, but my wife still says you look like one, you still are one. And my meeting after this is with the Commissioner and his Chief Officer team, so she's not far off. But I think also if we look at some of the stuff, and I'll come from that perspective, but we launched when I was running the fraud squad back in 88 to 93, we launched the Computer Misuse Act in 1990, and it's still there. Yes. In 1988, we launched a Serious Fraud Office, and it's still there and perhaps not functioning the way it was ever intended. And you got to look at those things and think, how do we change? And I think I've had a pretty good career, 50 years of law enforcement, but ChatGPT summarised it in 4 paragraphs. Sadly, it's stunningly accurate. It just doesn't have any padding on it. I was a pretty good senior detective, did a lot of things, and people only want to talk about my time at the Bank of England, and which is quite interesting. And everybody talks on it. I'm not sure if I like the current TV series Gold, but because I think it glamorised the first piece. I think the second phase that's just started this Sunday is slightly different. But the last gold robbery was 1983. So what are you going to do with a bar of gold? You know, you put it on the mantelpiece. You know, it's a crime that's never going to happen. So it never concerned me. But the thing I think is interesting when when Mark Carney came, I like Carney as a person, and I worked with Mervyn and Mark, and quite interested in dealing with an English statesman, which Mervyn is and was then, and you deal with Canadian Carney, who's more direct, forthright. And I think when you get onto your people thing, I remember when I met Mervyn came in with his entourage, you know, his personal private secretary, his secretary, and everybody else. And Mervyn shook my hand. He said, "Don, we're so pleased you're here," you know, which is quite a nice welcome. When Mark arrived, I go down to the parlours and I'm going to go into his office, and everybody gets up to come in, and he goes, "Do you want them?" I said, "I don't want them. Do you want them?" He goes, "I don't want them." So we went in his office on his own. That really upset those people because they didn't know what was being said. They weren't recording it. It wasn't documented. He said one thing to me, and I'll come on to the other piece in a moment. He said, "I'll do anything you want me to do. Anything. You tell me I can't get this train. You tell me I can't go here. I can't do this. Whatever. Do anything. But if I ever challenge you and you can't give me solid and sound reasoning why you want me to do it," he said, "we fall out." And we never fell out. So when you get to your people point, you've got to have the reasoning and justification behind it. So I think it was in the spring of 2013. Charlotte was the COO, Charlotte Hogg. And she said, "Oh, Mark wants you to create the first ever cyber division at the Bank of England, become the first ever CISO." And I don't think it was a request, actually. I think it would have been followed by a P45 if I said no. And I said, "Well, I was actually planning chapter 4 of my life in 2 years' time." And she goes, "Mark says you can do it in 2 years." I said, "Okay." And we did. We built the cyber division at the Bank of England. I built from one person to 7 people and a 3.2 million budget, fully funded, fully running. We also built CBEST. I forget if it was right now. I think we put 21 recommendations to the Cabinet Office about what should be done in respect to the financial sector, safety and security. And they threw 18 of them back to us. And one of those was CBEST. And CBEST is an acronym without any meaning. And the reason is we did have words that went behind the acronym, but we couldn't use them for various reasons. So if you look up CBEST, it actually doesn't have a meaning. Basically, it's threat-led penetration testing. And so if I go back through that time, and you can look at CBEST now, and Iain and I have discussed it over the years, you can apply the CBEST principle, which was originally applied to the 24 then supervised banks. And basically what it says was, and if you look at this, and I did a bit of work a couple of years ago in the medical world, what is your principal asset? What's going to hurt you? And if you're a medical insurer, if you lost £20 million, it's not going to make you happy, but it isn't going to break you. But if you lost people's personal, private medical records, you're finished. So that's the primary asset. What's the primary asset? And this piece of work we did, they had 250 platforms of various aspects of their business. I said, right, I want to know the top 5. So they got it down to 12. And I said, no, I want to know the top 5 that are looking at your critical assets to identify what are the platforms, what are the support functionalities that keep your critical assets alive, and then start focusing on those alone. Then, as Sebastian said, look at the threat assessment. There are many companies out there who've got substantial knowledge and ability to actually tell you what's happening, yes? To tell you what's happening. So you've got your asset, you've got your platforms, you've whittled them down, you've put your focus, and then look and see what your third-party responsibilities are. You must treat your third parties the same as you treat yourself. and the third parties, and the third parties. You've got to go all the way down that supply chain, because that's the weakest link. I remember when I was at JP Morgan, we were going to put our payroll, we had about 200 people in Moscow at the time. We built that from a 2-person office to a 200-person office. And they were going to put the payroll and HR in Moscow. And I went, you've got to be joking. Why would we do that? Yes. And they said, okay, well, we'll put it in Cyprus. And at that time, Cyprus was full of Russian oligarchs and Russian tax avoidance. And I said, no. So look at those third parties. So if you come back to it, principally, and I know my colleagues here will talk at a different level, but when we come back to what Sebastian was saying, what I'm saying is, look at the base level, look at your people, understand who you've got, understand the threat, put your energy and attention where it's going to hurt you most. Use your SOC. Ian's great on SOCs, but that particular the particular insurance company I went to, they had a SOC. They didn't even know they had a SOC intelligence team because they'd done various acquisitions. And I met this intelligence team, and I said, "How many investigations have you done this year?" And they said 70. Okay, and how many were on your prime asset? 0. They've done 70 pieces of excellent work, but of no consequence to the business whatsoever. So understand what you're doing, understand your risk, and then finally, and it may not come up anymore in this, is know how to deal with crisis management. Know how to deal when it goes wrong. Example, 7/7, I was at JP Morgan. Bill Winters is now the chief executive of Standard Chartered Bank. He was the head of Europe at the time. I remember having a meeting with Bill. I said, Bill, you're a great banker, but you're not a counter-terrorism expert. Let me make these decisions. It's where my skill set comes from. It's what you pay me for. It's what you pay me to do. Don't even step into that arena because you'll be knocked over as soon as you do. And how many CEOs have you seen go on the media and be completely offsided because they don't have the knowledge and skill set? Make sure you've got a crisis management structure, plan, and advocate who can work on your behalf, because it will go wrong. It will go wrong. But you can try and stop it going wrong. And that's where my principles come from.
Don, thank you. So Alec, fairly fresh back from NATO Parliamentary Assembly meetings. Perhaps give us your perspective on this.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. And I think it's interesting that we've got gas energy, sort of organic energy, we've got nuclear energy, we've got banking, critical infrastructure. And I'm coming across from the point of view of the defence of the realm, really, or the defence of NATO. Just to say that the NATO Parliamentary Assembly was formed 5 years after NATO and became the democratic accountability, does research, feeds into reports. Some of those reports will be discussed at the Leaders' Summit when we were doing the NATO 2030 vision of what we need to defend. And obviously, time's moved on. I think that we are already hearing about, Russia was specifically mentioned, and we can talk about China, we can talk about North Korea. There are millions and millions of cyber attacks happening constantly on all Western nations, but that is not as simple as it sounds, because it can exist in the grey areas. Okay, so what a lot of these countries are doing, first of all, the best people to enact these things for them are criminal gangs. You cannot link that back to a government. Therefore, from a NATO perspective, you could not authorise an Article 5 defence. But what would that even look like? How great is the risk? Well, the risk is simple. Last year, the NHS was crippled for a day through a mistake on an upgrade to virus software. Microsoft had to move rapidly to patch that. A few years ago, Russia managed to turn a Ukrainian power station into a bomb, and it all closed down. And when they booted it back up, it would have just created a massive explosion, would have run out of control. Now, that didn't happen because there was one mistake in the code. AI will get rid of those mistakes as it goes forward. And therefore, from a defence point of view, you have got to be on top of AR, but you've got to be on top of things like quantum computing. But quantum computing is very much in the early stages, but has exponential growth. I was at some lectures at MIT last year, and I think, we were there as parliamentarians, but I'm a mechanical engineer by background. I think I just about stayed up with what the professor was lecturing about, and he was a very enthusiastic man. And in there lies a worry that you had 30, 40 parliamentarians whose work is the NATO Parliamentary Assembly who were lost, and yet we're the legislators. And I think that actually one of the important things that's come out of the Strategic Defence Review is the recognition of a cyber EM department, or cyber, I'm not quite sure how they're going to pronounce it, which is a whole of force endeavour, that you will actually now recognise that all of the cyber defence of the realm has to be across all aspects, that you cannot any longer work in silos. Because I ask people the question, or I say to people, I believe in this parliament there will be a massive attack on this country from Russia. And everybody assumes straight away that that'll be ballistic missiles falling on the country. No, that is so old. That goes back to the gold bullion theft. That's analog. The ability to try, if you want to dominate a country, you do two things. You destroy the economy, you take control of the media. Then you enslave the population. That are your key objectives when you are trying to invade a country. You no longer need ballistic weapons to do that. And that in itself should keep everybody awake at night. But actually, we talk about the cutting of cables. That's the moment that you're going to go ballistic. Because to do that is the nuclear approach, because it's all going to be cyber attack. And if you cut the data cables, you can no longer do that to an extent. 95% of data is sent through undersea cables. You can use satellites, but you slow things down immensely. Energy pipelines, that worries me immensely. Again, the Strategic Defence Review has recognised that we have to up our submarine capability. NATO as a whole needs to focus more on maritime for its surface infrastructure in terms of energy, its subsurface infrastructure, again, in terms of energy and data cables. Recently been in Svalbard, way up in the north, where you've got 170 satellite dishes gathering all polar orbital satellites, go across there 14 times a day and get all download, 14 out of 14. You get 5 out of 14 across the equator. So this is critical. But the Svalbard Treaty means, with the 43 signatories, including China, that you have equal rights. And actually, they've now expanded out a whole range of satellites, which actually, if you watch the new Mission Impossible film, when you see those dishes, that is up in Svalbard. And they are put in place for the private enterprises, such as Elon Musk, etc., to gather that data. That's all transported by data cable, 9,000 kilometres of data cable coming from there alone. So how do you keep up in terms of that defence posture? Because NATO cyber defence starts in Latvia. Research is happening in Estonia. It's not by accident that the data cable between Estonia and Finland got cut. But there are roughly about 200 accidental data cuts every year. For seamanship, dragging of anchors, they're not all sabotage. And again, that lays into, so how do you identify where the risk patterns are coming from? So that all comes back to what's being discussed here through the people dealing with critical infrastructure, of you have to be the line of defence. Because in terms of our military capability, even by linking up, cyber operations and what we do, really still the last line of defence is the business who has the data itself, because it's such a vast project in terms of trying to do the military defence that almost becomes impossible. North Korea have stolen $3 billion of crypto since 2017, which has funded their nuclear program. And that in itself will start to cause market instabilities. you now have an alliance of North Korea, Iran, China, Russia. China now are the dominant party over Russia. Russia never let China into the high north. Now China have full access and are building infrastructure with Russia along there. So the whole geopolitical picture has changed. But the key weapon in any hot war as it moves forward will be cyber attack. It's cheaper. It's more difficult to identify who's done it. It can absolutely cripple an economy. So I think I'll leave it there because we can expand that further on.
Great, thank you. Lord McNicol, well, thank you for being here today. I know you've got quite a lot on already today, and you've had quite a bit to do before you arrived here today in your role as chair of Nuclear Industry Association. Perhaps you could give us a view not only from that sector, but also in your role as trade envoy to the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I'll start with the trade envoy side. The new government has continued where the last government left on trade envoys. So quite nice that there's a bit of continuity that's come with it. I'm recently back from Jordan, where there was a defence and security trade mission, and what we're looking to do, or the reason that the trade envoys were set up in the first place, was about how we take British businesses and how we help and support them. I'm expanding into new markets. So the two main markets I look after are Jordan and Kuwait. So businesses like METCLOUD, there is a huge opportunity, and for many of you in the room, to work with the trade envoys if there's missions and areas that you're specifically interested in trying to get into, to look at expanding and growing your businesses. And it is quite simple economics. If we can help British businesses expand, then there's more revenue comes back in. There's more that Rachel has that she can then spend on health and education and defence, as we're hearing. Just on the defence thing, really interesting point. There's been all the arguments about how much we spend on defence, and it's dropped down since the 1960s. In the 60s, the UK was spending 6% of our GDP, and there's this big argument just now about how much we're spending, whether it's 2%, whether it's 2.5%, is it going to go up to 3%? Now, I know that was a very different time, but it does feel, it was analogue then, but it does feel that in many ways, through the issues of critical national infrastructure in terms of attacks coming in, the risks are of a similar level. So actually, that spend is going to very much go into the cyber and the digital protection side. So on the trade envoy, what we're looking to do is how do we take our British businesses, get them out into the different missions and expand them. And there's opportunities to work with you. So I'm hopefully at the end, before I head off, if anyone has got businesses that are looking to expand internationally, then do get in touch with myself, or Darren can reach out to some of the other trade envoys. And it is those areas of resilience, of basically national infrastructure and protecting the country. And it's not just the UK, as you see, that is under attack from the nefarious actors. There is an attack on all of us who share that sort of world vision, which is fundamentally different from theirs. So the services that we can offer are, yes, about protecting the UK, but also internationally protecting our supply chain and the businesses that flow in. So this morning we've just had very good news on the nuclear industry. The government are committing to building a second gigawatt large nuclear reactor in Sizewell in Suffolk, as well as moving into the SMR and supporting Rolls-Royce with the build on the SMR. The reason that events like this are so important is exactly as Alec has just said. The attacks that are going to come into the future, yes, are going to be on businesses, as we've seen with Marks and Spencer's, and just looking at the amount of attacks that are happening just now is just frightening. And that's about destabilising, that's about undermining the economy, it's about undermining productivity. But the real worry, and this is where more energy needs to be spent with the politicians across the political spectrum, is those attacks that come in on whether it's our gas infrastructure, whether it's our health infrastructure, or whether it's the wider energy infrastructure. So with the investment that's coming in, that's been put into the nuclear sector, what sits beside that is extra investment that's needed in the protection of that national infrastructure. And that's one of the arguments that we'll be making as part of the Nuclear Industry Association. It's great that we're going to invest and build and develop these new technologies with SMRs, continue with the gigawatts, but what needs to sit beside that is the investment to actually make sure that it is protected and not at risk. And then I'll just finish on data. I sit on the board of a lending business. Every day through the Barracuda reports, we see the attacks that come in on that lending business that's there. What we need through that business is basically more support and more link up, as Don was touching on, with the national agencies to make sure that the protections are in place to stop those attacks happening. So there's a huge amount of opportunity, there's a huge amount of risk that sort of sits there just now, and it's how do we fit those both together to protect the businesses as well as government. And we haven't even touched on democracy yet. So myself and Darren used to run our political parties. I was the General Secretary of the Labour Party. Darren was CEO of the Conservative Party. We held, both political parties hold databases. They're held at constituency level, at Alec's level, but the big one is held at the national level. We had to put in place, and this is where it comes down to the data sovereignty, we had to ensure that information, which is held on every elector in the UK, and then our information on top of that, was held safely and securely inside the UK. I'm not sure how much of our government databases are actually held safely and securely inside the UK, rather than abroad, and we might touch a bit on that as well.
Thank you. Sebastian, I'm going to come to you first on the next question that I have. How will the Cyber Security and Resilience Bill reshape the regulatory landscape for CNI operators, especially in sectors like energy, water and healthcare?
Obviously from the energy perspective. So I think as a business we are quite happy with the steps that the Labour government has taken in updating the NIST regulations that date from 2018. I think it's a recognition that the cybersecurity landscape evolves very rapidly, and I would argue as well that we are quite behind in assessing that reality. But at least we are getting there. I think it also shows that we need to, in the UK, we need to make sure that we stay on par with other jurisdictions, such as the EU, that have implemented the NIS2 regulations as well. But yeah, I think it's a good step overall. Obviously, there are still some workarounds that need to happen with DCIT in terms of understanding where some of the measures will fall, and particularly when it comes to the protection of MSPs. But yeah, overall, I think it's going to be quite a good regulation in terms of improving the security landscape in the UK. So just in terms of how it will change, obviously the inclusion of managed service providers into the regulation and into scope is going to be quite good. I think obviously quite a lot of the discussion will be in terms of what the definition specifically of MSPs will be, and how that will touch some of these smaller businesses that probably won't have the capacity to implement a lot of the regulation that will be coming. As a CNI operator, we are already, specifically as an operation of essential services, we are already under NIST regulation. So of all the changes that will be implemented for the CSR bill, for us, obviously, it will need some changes and quite a lot of investment as well. But we can take it. I think a lot of the question will be how will small businesses that sometimes are the ones that don't have the capacity to implement those security changes, how will they react? And will the government help them? Not only in terms of potentially the funding, but especially in terms of the guidance. And I think that would be quite key. Given that the conference is about data sovereignty, I think the inclusion of data centers into the scope as well would be quite beneficial. I think I'm quite glad that the government has listened to some of the consultation responses that were done in the past under the previous government. Data centers are classified as PNI, but now being introduced under the scope of this new legislation will obviously enhance the security, but again, there will be quite a lot of questions that still need to be answered in terms of if the data center of the data that those centers hold is in the UK, will the new legislation fall onto them, for instance, and what's the classification of that data? Will, depending on the classification, is it sensitive, is it secret, and so on, will there be any sovereign, capabilities next to that? Again, quite a lot of questions that for a lot of companies such as yourself, I think will be quite important to understand. But I think one of the, from a regulatory perspective, some of the two things that for me are quite not worrisome, but we need to understand a bit more is for those of you who have probably seen it, but I mean, one of the things that was included in the policy statement that was published in April was giving the Secretary of State powers of direction, when it comes to telling a business or a regulated entity what to do in the case of a national security incident. Again, so many questions there because, for instance, the UK is one of the countries that doesn't have a definition of what a security incident is or a national security is. So that leaves quite a lot of room in terms of for the government to say, well, this is what it is, this is what it isn't. Also, in terms of does that apply to ransomware attacks? For instance, there was a consultation by the Home Office in terms of enacting ransomware legislation. How will these two legislations coincide? That sort of thing. So quite a lot of questions, but I think it will be overall beneficial. And it's just a matter of making sure that for entities such as ourselves, but particularly for small and medium enterprises, there is enough guidance to make sure that they can implement a lot of the necessary changes that need to be implemented.
Okay, that's great, Ian. I'm sure you must have some thoughts around this too.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing things evolve really quickly. I mean, we've been, as I said earlier on in my opening statement, is that we operate in the eye of the storm every day. We are at the epicenter every day. We see everything. We see millions of attacks constantly, sometimes daily, sometimes every few days. But that constant attack, we understand the types of attacks, we understand the types of malware. We've got a real good appreciation of, how the threat landscape looks right now. And I mentioned earlier on that literally we could not have this conversation 12 months ago. We wouldn't have had the political buy-in. We wouldn't have had the conversations going on at a national level, at a media level. I'm constantly now talking to business leaders at all different levels around how can they combat this emerging threat landscape, because they have a history of legacy systems that they have to protect. one of the things that exists in utilities and energy, and similarly in manufacturing, is things called operation technology. And some of them are 40, 50 years old, some of those manufacturing systems, and are run on really old software. And if anything happens, like they have an attack, which it does happen on a regular basis, they could be out of production in a manufacturing environment for 6 weeks, 8 weeks at a time. That has a huge impact and a loss of millions per day. So whilst this is all going on, general public think, well, why aren't people, why haven't people woken up to the threat sooner? And why is it only happening now? I don't have the answer to that. All I do know is that we were having conversations with companies on a regular basis, but a slower cadence. This year, we're having conversations weekly with large organizations around what is the threat landscape, how can they combat the threat landscape, and the conversation piece around sovereignty of data. We were having conversations with companies only 12 months ago when they're saying, well, our data is safe. It's in Microsoft Cloud. It's in Microsoft Azure. It's safe in AWS. And then when you actually explain to them that, well, it may be safe from an infrastructure perspective, but the data itself that sits inside that cloud environment is subject to a thing called the Cloud Act in the US, which gives intelligence agencies, access to that data. So it's not sovereign. The other thing as well is it's supported by people who are across the whole globe, because most large corporates like Microsoft and AWS have something that they call follow the sun support. So that they could have technical people supporting that data from not this country, obviously. It could be anywhere. It could be the US, it could be Europe, it could be the Far East, the Philippines, and so forth. And then you've got the third thing is that increasingly the government itself, the government property agency, other agencies and so forth that need top secret and top secret capability. And that can only be supported by security cleared personnel. And that's what we have as a business. So we have all of the tiers, both the technical capability to prevent data breaches and data security provision, but also the resilience across multiple data centers. But then we've also got the personnel piece where they're all security cleared personnel, so we can provide that. Microsoft can't do that, and AWS can't do that, and Google can't do that because they're US operators. And this is the challenge that we've had trying to educate our own country, our own businesses, because they're sleepwalking. They think it's okay having it all operated in a cloud provider like Microsoft. They're so big, how could they fail? But they have outages all the time. And something that was brought to the topic earlier on is that there was a major outage and a major system downtime globally from CrowdStrike, and Microsoft touched about a patch issue and so forth. But people were taking still 6 weeks and 8 weeks still to repair that problem. And that impacted financial services, banking, manufacturing, production, supply. Everyone had an impact. And because it's all about the supply chain resilience. And this is what we are now sort of trying to help businesses who sit down below that tier one governmental major providers. It's the supply chain that are the weak links, and that's where METCLOUD are offering. And then I briefly had a chat to Ian earlier on, and we're providing advisory services to other countries like Jordan, Egypt, Kuwait, UAE, Saudi, because those countries have been countries that have operated in, I guess, silos where they've just operated having their own systems, their own on-premise systems. Cloud is something that's really new to them. And so they're coming to us saying, well, can you help us architect a sovereign and private cloud capability in our country? And that's what we're currently embarking on, is providing that level of knowledge, intelligence, and capability to countries across the world that have been slow on embracing cloud services and cloud technology. So that helps.
Thank you, Ian. We're going to open up to some questions and observations in a second. And before I challenge the politicians on the panel about the pace of government, I thought Sebastian's point there was quite interesting in terms of the pace of change from sort of legislators' point of view. But Don, what's your experience in terms of preparedness, in terms of the sector that you sit in?
Let's look at we haven't mentioned one word yet, education. I'd like us to think about education. I'll give you a reason behind that. For me, and partnership, we should mention that as well, because I think we've got to find a partnership approach to things. And if you look at my chat GPT, you'll see that partnership is my big theme, but we've got to find that difference between commerciality and sharing, and what we can share to make us all safer without actually giving any commercial acumen away. And the easy way is not to do that, and the best way is to do it and play that little bit of risk. But we've got to all partner against whoever is attacking us. But on the education point and the CBEST point is that, and my colleague at the bank wouldn't answer this question, but he was a little bit more cautious than I was, because they actually said, did you ever do CBEST on yourself? And Andrew said, well, I'm not in a position to answer that. But I did a panel session, said, yeah, I'm happy to answer that. We did do CBEST on ourselves, and we're better for it. And that's the reality. In this room, if 8 out of 10 meant you got detention and 10 out of 10 meant you went to jail, we were 8. I had 8. And before I left, having built the team, built the CBEST, we got ourselves down to 4.5. And we did that through education. The education has to come from the top of the house. Now, whether that's government or it's Mark Carney, we actually built cardboard robots, cyber robots. They were about 8 foot tall. Yeah, quite impressive. Yeah, and the biggest challenge at the end was people wanted to buy them and take them home to their kids. Yes, so but we had a cyber week. We had education. It was quite glitzy in the Bank of England, but education. But going with that, this is where a lot of financial organisations fall over sometimes. You've got to have someone to respond. You know, a terrorist attack, you know, they don't work 9 to 5. They don't have a structure of working. You can, you know, my philosophy of security is it's got to work at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning. That's the most critical time, 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning. So if someone discovers something at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning, have you got someone in your organisation who can respond to that discovery? And if the answer is no, then everything you do is going to fail. Because if you don't respond, they'll never tell you again. They'll just go, what's the point? Yeah. So I think 3 things: education, partnership, and response, which builds into the factor you mentioned earlier about resilience and recovery, because it's the 3 R's, isn't it? And resilience and recovery are the reality today. Yeah. Because the prevention doesn't always work, but resilience and recovery. And the sooner we share, the sooner we identify, we do that. If you look at basic policing, basic crime, I mean, like the current Home Secretary wants more police officers back on the streets. I actually do agree with that. What they do is more important. You know, it's what you do with them when they're on the streets, as opposed to just having them on the streets. But we've got to build in that working together and not be frightened to share. What was the expression we used during the Olympics on counter-terrorism? Dare not to share. You're going to get more criticised by not sharing than what you would by sharing. That's my thoughts on that.
Thank you. So, Alec, you've obviously been the government minister. You've sat in the House of Commons with Conservative governments, obviously more recently a Labour government. Would you accept that criticism that sometimes governments of all persuasions are always just slightly behind the curve when it comes to regulations?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that there's an interesting conversation now has to take place. There is legislation going through the House of Commons on the data bill, etc., and how we structure, how we move forward, and what the protections are. Do we want to have the traditional society where the public are fully informed of the legislation that governments pass, that they can vote on that in general elections, that we are fully accountable to the public? Because the people attacking us don't need to worry about any of those things. They can just do it. So, as we all know, we've always had the intelligence services, but I think a lot of people will have heard the phrase, we do the unquestionable things so that you can sleep safely in your beds. Does that now need to move into this new domain? Because just by the nature of a free society where governments are entirely accountable to their electorate and their society, you don't want these things to take place in a closed room, which may involve doing some of the things that you absolutely don't want to happen. And that's not a conversation that our society is ready to have yet. We were chatting earlier on. Darren, you'll recognise this in your CEO role. I'm sure Ian will recognise this as his General Secretary role, that the traditional Western democratic parties that have been around centuries are completely behind the curve on social media campaigning. Always have been. You know, first of all, Twitter comes along and we're like, right, we've all got a campaign on Twitter. I was a candidate who hadn't been elected when that one first came along. And, you know, we were learning about that. And then Facebook comes along and we're learning about that. And what happens is the generation in their 20s who buy into this, it moves forward. Something comes in underneath it. So now you've got TikTok. Now, we've been having a conversation about whether we're even allowed to use TikTok because of it being owned by the Chinese. And yet that is exactly how people in their 20s are getting their news feeds and they're getting their political input. You know, Reform fell into it by accident because they didn't have the organisation or the money effectively to be able to do the traditional forms of campaigning in written literature or the bodies on the ground to knock on doors, etc. So they went for TikTok, hugely successful. You know, one of the biggest cohorts of voters they've got are males 18 to 30. And that's because they've got that information off there. Now, that's fair enough. That's the democracy working in. But now extrapolate that to your threat actors. You know, I'm sure you've all been able to look on YouTube. So, right, so you take the rock band Queen. Freddie Mercury died in 1991. But I can quickly Google Freddie Mercury singing a song completely believably that was written 25 years after his death. Okay, and that's done on a kitchen table. You know, this is the point with AI, with quantum computing, things can be developed that are utterly convincing and to be able to get in there. And you then have to come back to the question of stop thinking about what the economic advantages may be to attack a country and start thinking about an autocracy that doesn't want a democracy to exist. So it is not about, can I take over the sovereign wealth? Can I steal that money to build nuclear weapons? Can I do those things? It's about, I will remove my opponents. Because some of these things don't make sense. You know, by instinct, humans only have one instinct, which is survival. And if you break that down further, there's only three things that humans are scared of. They're scared of the dark, they're scared of the cold, and they're scared of hunger. They're the three things. Take away those things, society collapses in 24 hours. And there's, you know, you've got shortages on the shelves in M&S, but you can go into Morrison's, Sainsbury's, etc. So people haven't quite fathomed just how quickly their food supplies disappeared because it was focused on one business. Now, you get that right, and you can remove the food stocks. You literally cause anarchy on the streets. And so the question becomes, do we live in the traditional sense that governments pass legislation, that we have to defend that to the public? Because a piece of legislation takes 9 months to get through the House of Commons. Or do we legislate to say, actually, we are going to hand this over to a secret government organisation, which we will have a body like the Intelligence Security Committee to oversee, but you are never going to know about it. And there are plenty of people who complain about the activities of MI6 and MI5 now, just in the analogue world. society, I don't believe, is ready to answer that question yet.
Okay, that's a pretty full answer. Finally, before we open it up, Ian, governments need to move a bit quicker on these things.
Yes, yeah, they do. For many of the reasons that Alec has just talked about. I don't have TikTok, and if I had a phone which was provided by Parliament, I wouldn't be allowed to download TikTok onto it. Yeah, as Alec has just said, so many people now are getting their news, their data, their conversations through TikTok. But it's even more important than that. They're also getting their financial investment information through social media as well, and often through TikTok. So there are some really big questions that haven't yet been answered by governments in terms of how we deal with it. I was looking through some of the statistics, and many of you will know these, right? Ian, you were talking about the data sovereignty. 90% of UK data is hosted in data centres that are owned by foreign-based companies. So again, going to your point about Google, AWS, and Microsoft. Now, do we want that as a country? Is there a problem with that? Depends what the data is. If it's a Facebook account, which I don't use that much now, probably doesn't matter. But if it's my bank account details, or it's details of my health records, do I want them to be held and to be hosted by foreign-owned companies? And I don't think either as individuals, as a country, as a society, we've had that, or as politicians, we've had that full debate yet. The other one was about the legacy systems, and Ian touched on this as well. The UK public sector operates with 228 legacy systems, many of which are outdated and unsupported. Now, to bring those legacy systems up to speed, to get them protected, whether it's as critical national infrastructure, whether it's just as data centres that hold information on us, whether that's at local government, whether it's at health, or whether it's central government and our taxes, that is all going to cost money to do. But what's the cost of not doing it? And you look at Marks and Spencer's, the website is still down. How much have they lost in terms of sales, in terms of trust, in terms of brand, brand loyalty, and actually brand perception? And it's those areas that we need to move further on and quicker on, and we're just not there. So I'll finish with one stat, which is probably the most frightening one. Around 1 in 3 of the cybersecurity roles in UK government remain unfilled. And maybe it's one of the questions, we haven't had a chance to touch on it too much as a panel, but it's about the people. Where are where's the training? Where's the universities? Where's the work or the support that's been given to our universities to drive and to make sure that we have the people to fill these roles? And that's before we even talk about quantum. We are not building a quantum computer in the UK. Quantum are building one with the Australian government. In Australia, they're building it with one of the American universities in the US, and the Chinese are working on their quantum computer. Neither the last government nor this government has. We've invested in the big computer in Edinburgh. I'm not quite sure what it is if it's not a quantum computer, but it's not a quantum computer. And we need a quantum computer to create the passwords and the passkeys and the passcodes to protect against the attacks that will come as soon as quantum computing is up and running. Now, it is, I don't know, it'd be interesting if anyone's got the sort of timescale, 3, 5, 10 years away, because they don't actually exist yet. but they're coming. And unless we invest in it, we will be left behind. Or at risk. We'll be at risk. That's the safest way.
Thank you. That feels like the next event, Ian, in terms of quantum computing. Questions? Go Chandler first, and then you, and then right to the back. And the good news is there are microphones above you that you can't see, so you don't need to shout.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the panel. There just seems to be, whatever you read in a newspaper or online, there's always an emerging threat. There is for want of a better word, an absolute laggard in the capacity for government to pass legislation and move. But the piece that keeps reoccurring seems to be right. As a country, you've got to decide what you're going to go and do it. There isn't time for a debate because technology evolves at a rate of knots, and we are constantly facing this. So at what point do you see as a panel, government just says, okay, look, this has to be a cross-party initiative. It cannot continue to be siloed. And the debates whether we should have a quantum computing capacity or not is not a debate, number one. And number two, as a result of, let's say, the lack of that, where are we today if you're to be objective in our capacity around data sovereignty, resilience, and critical national infrastructure? Where are we in the league table? Not what we read in the paper. Where are we actually in that league table?
Don.
Let's take a few of the questions just to...
Yeah, we can do. Yeah, do you want to go next?
Okay. I've got a question, and I've got two questions, and that is, okay, we know that whatever the case may be, we're going to be attacked. There's a possibility that we're going to be attacked, and so it's about recovery and resilience. And what concerned me was something about the insurance, cyber security insurance. I found out that Marks and Spencer's, they are going to lose about 300 million, and they're only insured for 100 million. So I don't know what we need to do in terms of making sure that we have adequate cybersecurity insurance organizations. I'm not even sure whether the government has cybersecurity insurance. The next thing is about quantum computing. When it does come, which having a conversation with somebody from IBM, that is 2029. Like us in the UK, we need to actually start implementing cyber friendly, is it not friendly, but we need to start implementing quantum safe algorithms, and we need to start that now. And I've also found out that when it comes to our quantum computing startups, most of them have to actually get funds outside the UK. There was a lady who raised 100 million. 50 million was raised in Japan. Why are we allowing that to happen? Why can't the government, provide the quantum infrastructure? I know that it's going to be expensive, but we shouldn't be relying on other countries to provide us with funding. I've just found out that another quantum organization has sold to an American company for 100.1 billion. So that is the knowledge that we have going to someone else. So what are we doing about that?
Great questions. The back.
My name is Biju Menon. I'm founder investor. I have a couple of things. Firstly, on Lord Ian mentioned about the problem on quantum passwords. There is a British company I'm dealing with on the investment side who actually can create passwords without quantum computer, but using quantum physics. I thought it was a really good innovation. They're from the Cambridge-Oxford Circle. Triangle, they say, right? The other point is about I was a founder. I'm still a founder of a different company. I've gone through the building from nothing to something, so seed, growth, scale. And as a founder, the priority is never cybersecurity. There are other things that we feel more important to grow the business. So it's always an afterthought. My previous one was the HR Techs. We took the data security as a priority to protect people's data, but not cybersecurity. But then when GDPR regulation came, we invested to make sure we have infrastructure to protect the data. So what I'm trying to say is a regulation can let every businesses, irrespective of the sizes, take steps and invest people, resource, and whatnot to build that layer. In my view, because of geopolitical situations and all the things that we discussed, I think it's probably a good time to look into having that default mechanism to be put in place in organizations, maybe one with one overall revenue of, let's say, 1 million, which is where an attack should be looked into as an imminent or potential, where regulation will ensure all companies will have a basic structure, just like the AI Act that's coming up, of cybersecurity layer built in and upgrade with the increase in revenue. If we can get that like GDPR, I think we'll be in a better position, so to speak, in order to protect and also bring the knowledge across industries, because not many organizations even talk about cybersecurity, right? Because it's not prevalent, it's not the thing that you talk about. So that's kind of my sense, being in the ground layer, building a business and thinking about cybersecurity.
Great questions. I think Sebastian sort of covered some of that off in terms of those smaller, medium-sized businesses. And I can tell you from experience, there is something pretty terrifying when you take a call from somebody from the security services to say, we'd like to see you. We are slightly concerned about the process that you're currently running. And in my case, that was the leadership election to elect the next leader of the Conservative Party, who would have been the Prime Minister at the end of that process. And so we as a political party, and Ian touched upon this earlier, actually can be the gateway in for lots of state actors and others. Don, I think you want to kick off in terms of...
I'll come back on this, if I may. Thanks, Darren. On the insurance side, I made a big mistake about 6 years ago. I think it was Selfridges. If you have a kidnap and ransom insurance, and you let people know you've got it, it null and voids the insurance, right? That's a fact of life. Why do people say they've got cyber insurance? For the bad people, if they know you've got cyber insurance, they know they're going to get something, no matter what. So that's the first thing. So let's tighten down on that knowledge of cyber insurance. It's no different to a kidnap and ransom when you get it. It's the same process of negotiations. You need 3 people. You need a commercial person, you need a lawyer, and you need a hostage negotiator. For the hostage negotiator, the A to Z of hostage negotiation are the same as the A to Z for cyber negotiation. So that's what you need to start thinking about. Don't let people know you've got it. If you're just opening the door for someone to say, I'm going to get 1 million no matter what, yeah? Whether it's 100 million or 300 million, I think is a different discussion, a different arena. Get the team ready or have access, depending on the size of your organisation, the risk, the threat assessment. Do you have a team that can activate within 1 hour? Appropriate lawyer, commercial person, hostage negotiator. That's your pre-planning.
So regarding insurance as well, I would recommend that you look at the Home Office proposal for legislation on ransomware. So the first proposal is to ban CNI from making any ransom payments whatsoever. So, and the second and third proposal is also preventing any kind of business from paying ransom as well, because it goes back to the whole incentive for criminals like that. Now, obviously, it's just a proposal, but you could see that a lot of those regulatory changes will have an impact on the insurance as well, because as a CNI, if I'm not legally allowed to pay any ransom, then what happens on the insurance for cyber? So that's just one area where I would, I would look at if I were you from insurance perspective. I can just touch on, given that we're on quantum computing. So I don't know if you're familiar with the term PQC, post-quantum computing. So it's one of the latest ones in terms of like where we need to move in terms of the encryption as well, particularly given that a lot of the forecasts in terms of where the quantum computing will come are as early as 2029, but also as late as 2050 or 2070 as well. So nobody really knows. I think it's like the whole artificial general intelligence as well, when it will come. But one of the things that we are advocating for is that PQC and quantum computing, despite us not having a quantum computer in the UK, is one of the areas where there is quite a lot of expertise in the country. And we should use that in order to get ahead and to become world leaders in terms of how do we work with our allies in implementing some of the policy measures to enhance the security of everything that we'll be using for post-quantum computing as well. If you see at the EU level, for instance, the European Commission has already called for member states to have a roadmap in order to implement and to find out the systems where they could implement post-quantum computing to enhance the security, because it will come at some point. You know, it's inevitable. And particularly when it comes, for instance, with AI, you know, there will come moments where you will need to restrict the access of certain people to certain data that is produced by AI. Post-quantum computing and the encryption that will come from that will be one of the tools that we can use to enhance the security of that data. So I think in the case of the UK, and particularly the expertise that we have through the National Cybersecurity Centre, we need to take advantage of that, you know, and improve and enhance the security of the UK, and hopefully that will happen. I don't know with this government, but over the next 10 years or so, I hope that we will see some progress on that.
I'll just pick up 2 points. One about the funding, and then about the cross-party, because that's quite an interesting one. It'll be interesting to get Alec's take on that as well. The British Business Bank and British Patient Capital are government funds. So Quantum Motion, which is one of the UK firms that's looking to build a quantum computer, actually not that far from here, got funding through the British Business Bank. So again, if you're linked into any of these newer technologies and looking for funds, it's one of these things that I've run through both governments. So it's British Business Bank and their subsidiary British Patient Capital, BPC, that do the funding out. It's worth having a look at them. So there's opportunities. What we haven't seen, and this is a bit that worries me a little bit looking at it, is I think we need a more central government approach to the quantum computing question, and actually support in terms of building it, because it is expensive. But Sebastian's right, in terms of the time frame, we're not quite sure. The cross-party argument it is a good one, and we hear it in a number of areas. This issue is too important to be a political football. The reality is, outside of Prime Minister's questions, whether it's through the committee structure, which is cross-party, whether it's through the all-party parliamentary groups, which have to be cross-party, whether it's through the detailed discussions on legislation, often at committee stage, with experts, especially in the House of Lords, in specific areas taking part, but in the House of Commons, people who've got a specific interest in it, is far more collegiate, probably the wrong word, but is far more respectful and engaging and positive than most people see on social media or on the news. Because a bit of a punch-up is far more exciting. People shouting at each other is far more entertaining than actually sitting down and making some really difficult decisions. I'll leave Alex to talk a little bit about the NATO group. There are very knowledgeable and good people who understand critical national infrastructure, cyber security, data security. I'm on both sides of the House, and who understand it. The bit that is really interesting is, how do you take that political oversight and then ensure that the delivery through the civil service, whether it's the security services or whether it's through the Whitehall civil servants, is actually is needed now and what is going to be needed in the near future. That's the challenge. But actually, politics is far more collegiate than most people see on news or on social media, and that's a good thing. We still have our differences, though.
I think
That's good.
so. I know Darren 25 years, and we started off when I was first wanted to be a candidate many years ago. And when I got elected, Darren said to me, "You now have to transition from being a candidate to an MP." Now, what do you mean by that? And you see it now with the new intake, and they are slowly doing that, is that as a candidate, as somebody interested in politics, you attack. You attack, you attack, you attack. That is the bread and butter of political discourse to get elected. When you are elected, you are a statesman. You might not be a statesman at that point, but you are a statesman. And there is still that hubbub in the House of Commons. Most things that happen in the House of Commons are going to be the political bullfight. That's why the House of Commons has 400 seats for 650 MPs. It's deliberately built like that. When you get out of the House of Commons, that's when the statesmanship comes in and you have that cross-party working. And that is absolutely vital. I find it incredible at this moment in time that we are not basically completely funding building a quantum computer. If you are behind, you are not going to catch up. But we are the country who, in partnership with America, but we are the country who developed the Polaris nuclear weapon system launched from the Resolute submarines in the 1960s. We upgraded that to Trident in the 1980s. We are now building the dreadnoughts. The government have announced that they are already spending £15 billion upgrading the nuclear warheads. Why? Because that is a major part of security control. And yet, there's nothing been announced about investing government money in the billions into what is becoming the new nuclear weapon. You will see with the leaders' conference, you already have seen Mark Rutte saying it's 5%, but 1.5% is what you spend on your intelligence, security and defence supporting security. I would say that is exactly where the money needs to come from. But back to the question earlier on about when does it get accepted to do it? Well, the problem is this is where politicians just aren't responsible, but this is how it's going to be. This is not a party political comment that I'm about to make, but we had a general election where the argument was Tory party let the economy go out of control and had 11% inflation. Not a political argument, I hasten to add. The truth was there was a war in Ukraine and energy prices went up, and that's there. But the political football is to say it was your fault. So there is now no connection between what has actually happened to your prices and why they actually happened, because the politicians want to fight each other. That's what we do. That will not change. That will not change. So now you get into the question of, we used to spend 5 or 6% of GDP on defence, and then we spent 2%. Where did the 4% go? Went into welfare and the health service. So should the Chancellor tomorrow be announcing another £30 billion into the health service, should be announcing that actually that's got to be one of the 1.5% to build quantum computing to keep the country secure. Because for all the people who want the money to go into the health service, an accident shut the health service down for 24 hours. A proper attack that is successful destroys the health service. Where do you put your money? How do you explain that? But it is those decisions that have to be taken behind the scenes where actually there's a responsible attitude to, yep, I'm afraid that's what we've got to do. We've done it with nuclear. We have to recognise the world we now live in. But we don't.
Thank you. Right, we are coming to the end, and I'm conscious that Don has an appointment, which I think possibly started a few minutes ago. I think I'm going to come to Ian, I think, for the last word, but I think the soundbite so far from the morning for me is quantum computing, the next nuclear weapon, which is a fairly big statement, but one that we can explore here.
Yeah, very quickly. So quantum computing is obviously something that everyone's talked about the last 20 minutes or so. But we've still yet to fix all the problems around cybersecurity and AI. And we as a UK capability because we do not have the financial wherewithal or the financial capability to compete on all fronts. We have to fix. This is my belief. I'm not saying this is what we should be doing, but my belief is that we as a country should be fixing the basics first because we've got control of that. We can do that, and it won't even cost lots of money. It's all about policies, procedures, and implementing some systems that don't cost a lot of money. From my perspective, the government, any government, should be imposing better regulation. Because to Don's point, when he said that they did a review of the cybersecurity posture, and then 8 was detention and 10 would be prison, with all due respect, most of our industry would be in prison. Thankfully, there's not enough spaces for them. So we are in a really bad situation right now from an industry perspective, but we can fix it really quickly. But we need better regulation, and penalties need to be imposed on companies. Company directors will not do anything unless we change their behavior and they risk going to prison or they risk huge fines. Now, I know it might not be a politically acceptable, or it's a bit difficult to maybe do this, but we have it for health and safety. If a company steps out of line and has a really poor health and safety environment and somebody dies, a director can go to prison, and many do. Why isn't that the same for cybersecurity? Because actually deaths happen and it actually has a bigger impact, and that's what we should be looking at. We should be having a more rigorous and regulatory environment around cybersecurity for all businesses, for all organizations. And one point, our most poorly defended environments are local authorities. They are woeful. They get attacked all the time. They are paying ransom all the time. That's our first port of call. You know, we should be protecting our local authorities better. They should be better equipped or have a better mindset. It doesn't always need money. It needs better mindset, it needs better thinking. And then it's a layered approach, and we have to fix all of that. But all of that can be done really quite simply.
Ian, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for hosting today. Thanks, Sebastian, Don, Sir Alec, Lord McNicol, for being on the panel. I think a few of us are going to stay around a little bit afterwards for conversations and to develop some of this further. But thank you very much for being here today. Thank you.